so good. And the climax was just captivating.
Yeah. It's all credit to all the coaching and the players, and the AFL have put together an amazing year. We really have been spoiled this year. It's been story after story, event after event. Not always. I think usually the biggest stories are the ones we dwell on are the off-field ones, but on-field has given us so much joy this year. There's teams playing differently, fresh coaching. The Craig McRae story has been unbelievable. And what Michael Voss has done to Carlton, I understand. There'll be just some discussion about that today, but they're back in the game. They're back in the hunt. To see Sydney spike so quickly this year's been really good. To see Sam Mitchell in what will look like a poor year on the ladder do some really interesting things with the Hawks and get that club going. There's a lot of change needed at the West Coast and North Melbourne and Essendon. But in that middle part of the ladder, it's really difficult to see. Hard to identify where St Kilda were going to be all year. Hard to identify Fremantle where they were going to be all year. So there was so much mystery with every team. And in the end, you see Geelong, who've always sort of just been thereabouts, go boom, and all of a sudden be told. People have talked Melbourne down all year. I think we started by saying their best is the best in the comp. They're 50%, they're going at 70%, but their best is still the best. They haven't played their best all year and they find themselves second on the ladder. How does that work? I mean, run the measures through that. So it's just been a fantastic year of footy, and I think every fan base has had a reason to be invested.
There were 3 changes to the 8 in the end. Port fell from 2nd to 11th. The Giants went from 7th to 16th, and Essendon went from 8th to 15th. Collingwood came from 17th up to 4th. Fremantle from 11th to 5th, and Richmond from 12th to 7th. At the halfway mark, St Kilda was 4th and Carlton was 5th. Richmond and Collingwood were 9th and 10th. And then St Kilda turned 3 and 8 and Carlton turned 4 and 7.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. We had this conversation a few weeks ago. I think the teams that have started with a new coach, they tend to puncture late in the year because they're on in January. They're trying to get game plans refined, and it's full scale. Every practice match is on. There's no building into the year like a Richmond over the last 5 years. They've been prepared to risk a couple of home and away losses at the start of the year to build into the year, knowing it's a 23-week campaign, and then hit the ground running at the end of the year and build into a final series, hoping that all goes well to give you the best chance to win it. And we've heard Chris Scott talk about that countless times this year. I'm going to take this approach, and we may miss the 8, but if we make it, it'll be our best opportunity. So I can see, I've been surprised by Collingwood still fighting the way they are, but the others that have probably, Hawthorn have run aground, Carlton in a way have ran aground, whether it be health or form. They weren't the same team they were the first sort of 6 to 8 weeks. So I think that's understandable, but gee, it gives great base for next year. And people hate you talking about next year, but this is a premiership business. It's not about limping into the 8 or making the 8. And eighth is a nonsense position anyway, Gerard. If you look at the history of how 8th's gone, over the last 10 years, 4 wins, 6 losses, but the 6 losses have been by an average of 10 goals. And the 4 wins, one was a 1-pointer, great coaching by Nathan Buckley, the job done over in West Coast a couple of years ago. West Coast in 2017 by 2 points. So there's sort of freak events, I think, rather than, we've made the finals, now we're a chance. That doesn't really work that way.
The King's Gambit has to belong in the exceptional end yesterday, Collingwood and Carlton. And there's always the torturous, do you want to know the what and the why? Do you want to live the sliding doors? Self-flagellation for Carlton supporters can be addictive today. Do you want just to be cleansed of it? There's so much there, particularly as you demonstrated on the last play that sets up the Elliott goal to win it.
Yeah, and it's hard, it's hard because in the end, Carlton's season is lost through just basic communication, basic organisation from a couple of senior players. Head in the game stuff. 2 minutes to go. We've got the footy. It's a slow play. Hey, Jacob Weitering, turn your head. Have a look to who's got who on the right-hand side. Challenge them to go back to their opponent. Or if they need to guard space, challenge them to get their positioning right. Drag an extra man back. pull yourself 30 metres out the back and actually have the full landscape in front of you, because you don't need to score. All you need to do is hold up. So just flip the game, like Collingwood have done for the last 10 weeks. What's required at this particular time? Okay, now I need to do this. We need to score. We need corridor. We need aggression. We need to take risks. Not ridiculous risk, but risk that takes territory and puts us still in an aggressive piece of the MCG. They didn't do that. And people laughed last year when we showed Melbourne's hands and eyes thing, right? If they had hands and eyes yesterday, Carlton, for 2 minutes of footy, they're playing finals. So it sounds stupid, but this will be the sharpest and steepest learning curve these guys will go through. That at the end of the day, you're not playing finals because of the last 30 seconds or 40 seconds or 2 minutes of the last 2 weeks. So we've been through this. In North Melbourne years ago, we lost the grand final to Gary Ablett Senior after he took a mark after on the siren, kicked a goal after the siren 94. And the whole theme for pre-season was Dennis put it on these manuals and everything. Every little thing counts. Every little action you do, everything you don't do, every session extra session you miss, every weight session you cut short, all come back to haunt when the game is live. So I think that'll be the theme of Carlton's off-season, that every little thing counts. Dot every I, cross every T, leaders lead.
And the Collingwood side of things, you've got Mike Tyson in your mind.
I have. I think there's a little bit of I just was thinking. So when you think of Collingwood, and everyone says, oh, the numbers don't make sense. They do make sense. But to sum it up in a very succinct way, this is it.
My style is impetuous. My defense is impregnable.
I'm not going to play the rest. We're just going to leave it at that, Jared, because that's Collingwood. The last 6 weeks, they're the number one team in the competition without the footy. Their defensive 50 stands up. Okay, they got humbled in the third quarter yesterday, but across the course of the last 6 weeks, best in the competition without the footy. So they keep their gloves up. They don't wear any punches. They don't. You can throw as many inside 50s at them as you like. You can win as much contested footy as you like. Those numbers mean nothing if you can't get through their defensive grid and their defensive 50. So they don't wear any punches. You might hit their gloves. You might try and whack them. You might try and score, but you can't get through. And then every now and then, they don't jab. They throw a haymaker. And when they land, it's through the corridor and they score.
That was the most striking aspect watching it back last night, was the correction kick to stay in the corridor as they come out of half-back. The kick on the 45, it was corridor, 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 corridor. When they make those forays count, and it's suddenly everything's emboldened.
Yeah, and it was sort of crazy because you sort of need the opposition to win the ball to set you up to counterpunch, and it's contradicting all measures really, but it's a viable way to score. I mean, we talked about Sydney playing that slingshot footy years ago. It's a viable way to play the game. It's a risky way to play because you're risking giving the opposition a chance to score first. But they scored 4 of their 5 goals in the last term from the defensive half, 3 from defensive 50, full coast to coast. Like, you just don't do that. Or they've done that over and above what every other team's been able to do for a large period of time. Pick your years, 3 years, 5 years, 10, whatever you want to go with, you'll be proven correct. So, is it great coaching? Absolutely, because I don't think Craig McRae's coaching specifics of the game. He's not coaching perfection. What he's doing is coaching the minds of these players. What is required right now? So they think about the game, not, okay, now if we're in this situation, I've got to kick to there and I've got to kick on the 45 degree and do this and do that. It's not specifics. It's, hey, ball's in your hands. We've got 90 seconds to go. We need a goal. What are you going to do here? And the player actually is being educated. They're being fast-tracked. 30 games under Craig McRae, I think, is worth more than 30 games under some of the other coaches in the AFL right now because of the actual coaching of the mind, what's required, not kicking long down the line versus switching versus kicking on the 45. It's brilliant to watch. It was so good.
And if Robbie Gray has lived his days as the clutch player of the AFL, that mantle has passed as he retires to Jamie Elliott.
Yeah. And he had options, didn't he? I mean, he could have taken the safe way out and chipped the ball back into the corridor where there was a free player charging, say, 30 from goal. But I love the fact that these young guns, well, he's not a young gun, he's an experienced gun, says, no, this is me. This is what I do. And this is the think like winners mentality at Collingwood at the moment. Train like winners, think like winners, live like winners. If it's your turn, hey, you take it. You kick the goal. I love it. I think that the whole football club's jumping and they find themselves in the top four. No one predicted them to be in the top four. Not in your wildest dreams did we think, Frayne McRae had survive another near-death experience at the MCG yesterday.
Essendon's time of reckoning has had to wait. The sacking of Ben Rutten at the end of a dismal week for Essendon. It was an unnecessarily tortured and cruel affair, and Rutten was right when he said that he deserved better. The football decision is totally separate to that. The football decision is justifiable, and in some ways it's sound. It's perfectly fair for a board to lose faith in its coach when Essendon have played the way that they have. And there's a bit of history that's required in all of this as well. The succession plan was proven to be a comprehensive failure. It was put in place because Essendon didn't know how to get rid of John Worsfold when they felt his time was up. They chose Rutten when nobody really thought he was the standout candidate to be the next senior coach. They marked time for a year, and in the end, Rutten only had 2 years at the helm before the board lost faith there as well. The trouble is that Essendon is clearly a house divided, and if you don't sort the politics out, then the choosing of the next coach, I'm not sure that that's the most fundamental decision to be made. Is it a good job? Is the James Hird push real? Is Essendon right to limit their search to experienced coaches? It all creates the big issue in this means test, David King, and that is Essendon.
Yeah, and look, last Sunday night, so 8 days ago, I felt like Essendon as a football club had lost that edge, that ruthless edge, and all the things you just pointed out highlight that. They weren't strong enough to sack Worsfold and move on. They weren't strong enough to go with it. They thought they needed Worsfold at that particular time to hold the hands of a few to get. They didn't have that edge, And I felt like even the handover process was flawed. We know that there wasn't a coaching process done. They never really gave themselves the opportunity to get the best available because they'd already secured Ben. Now, we all hoped Ben was going to be a great coach, but as it turned out, he wasn't a great coach. So I think the decision to move on him is their right. They're in these positions of power to make these tough calls. Now, we can disagree with them or we can agree with them. That doesn't matter. They're in these positions to take control of the football club for the best premiership intentions. The way it happened was poor. They should have terminated his contract last Monday. We all agree on that. And if they had have, I think the rest would be pretty seamless. Okay, we can disagree with it, but the thirst to get a contract in front of Alistair Clarkson to try and nab him from the clutches of the Kangaroos, I think's a viable play. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So we all agree that that's the case. Where it leaves them now is a problem, okay? Because there's no logical next option. There isn't. If they choose James Hird, that's their right. They're not worried about what people think. They're worried about the next premiership opportunity. Now, I don't know if he's a great coach, James, or if he's a very good coach, or if he's a premiership coach. No idea. I don't think anyone has any idea on that. But if they think he is, well, all good to him. Why wouldn't they put him in the role? Do you agree with that?
I don't think it's quite as simple as that.
I know there's more to it. It's complex, but if they believe he's the man.
Yeah, so the problem in this scenario is who is they? Because there is no singular Essendon right now.
Well, the board.
It is riven at that club from coterie to board to football department. So if you can't come together with a united singular vision to find a solution, I don't know where that leaves you. Like they have to sort the politics out before they worry about hiring the next coach. But the football calendar doesn't work like that.
No.
So both are going to run
in
parallel. And if they don't sort the culture out and they don't sort the politics out, then they have had a sequence of good football people move through their club and be ruined by it.
which happens regularly at poor clubs. We often talk about that.
And not just in the coaching job.
No, so this is Essendon's issue right now, but it's not the first time it's been an issue in the AFL. You get through it. You can come through it, but I don't know. See, Essendon track back to Essendon. They track back to Essendon people. They do. They trust their own, probably more than most clubs. And I don't see another logical option. Like Ross Lyon, I don't think wants to coach again. Nathan Buckley has said countless times he's not interested in coaching right now and not for the foreseeable future. Who else is out there with the stamps and the courage as an experienced coach to take this role right now? There's not many options. So have they, in effect, sacked a young coach to be replacing him with another young coach? I mean, that's a disaster, really. So I tend to think there's a fair bit of truth in the Herd discussion because it's what they know, and he may. I think he'll be there in some way, shape, or form. Whether that's absolutely a senior coach or not, I'm not convinced. But if he's there, he's a pseudo senior coach.
Are they in a position to poach a coach?
Well, that's the big play, isn't it? And big plays are the only things that are going to save this current situation and save face for the board and the president, who's recently just taken over. So, can they get a Damien Hardwick out of Richmond? Can they get a Ken Hinkley out of Port Adelaide? You know, they're the sorts of plays that a ruthless, strong club is able to make. Now, they're difficult to achieve, but I don't see where else they go. It's really tough. It's an awful situation on the back of maybe being overly aggressive for Clarkson. You
like the idea of Hardwick back to Essendon, but the timing's not quite going to work.
No, it's not going to work. So this is they've run a year early. I mean, they had been there for another year. I think at 2-9 they could have had the discussion with Alistair, and clearly they didn't. They waited until they absolutely knew whether they were in love or not with Ben Rutten, and I think that's their biggest error in all of this. The timings from that point forward haven't worked. They don't marry up. But Damien's got the Essendon connection. He's probably the one person in my eyes that could jump in and save the whole thing. Now he may not want to move. Why would you? He's got a completely settled setup at Richmond. Got a similar, got a great team. He's had a fantastic tenure with the Tigers, and he's probably got a long tenure ahead of him. So he's not one that's in the Hinkley situation where if it starts poorly next year, Ken's in trouble. Damon's not in that situation, so it would have to be his call. But I mean, they're the sorts of acquisitions you're talking about. Impossible to pull off, but if you can save the whole box and dice.
Is the Essendon job a good job?
I think it is. I mean, if you can sort out all the other stuff, and you can't have success until you've got stability. We all accept that. But I think their list is a very good list. I've said this for a long time. And I think Adrian Dodoro is harshly judged. If you go through the selections they actually made, I think you'll find, and you can argue whether they paid overs for Dylan Hill or Devon Smith or those guys, but every club pays overs for the players they want and they have to trade for. And I think when you track back, the 2 years they were banned from the draft, 2013, 2014, they're the sorts of key senior experienced players right now that drive the ship. So can I just let you in on who those players would have been? So in 2013, did a bit of research yesterday. They were banned from the first two rounds of the draft in both years, and they were given a last pick in the first round in 2014 back as some sort of compensation. So they had picks 10, and they lost picks 10 and 28 in 2013. Pick 11 was Dom Sheed. Pick 13 was Paddy Cripps. Now, they've been after a big-bodied midfielder for a decade, okay? So let's just assume they may have looked at a Paddy Cripps at that pick. At pick 28 ended up being Rory Lobb. So they're batch that year. So they traded Cramry for pick 26, and that pick becomes Zach Merritt. So that year, it could have been. Now, this is perfect world stuff, right? But their draft haul that year could have been Cripps, Merritt, Lobb, Fantasia. That's a pretty good year. The next year, they were banned from pick 12 and 30. Pick 14's Jake Lever. Pick 13's Lockie Weller. Lockie Weller? Lockie were, I think, at 13. Pick 30 was Braden Maynard. So they trade Ryder for effectively pick 17, which becomes Langford. Okay, so they might have had Lever, Langford, Maynard. So those 2 years have really knocked this list around because you're chasing your tail after that point. You're having to deliver players ahead of time because your list is out of whack. So I look at Michael Hurley, and these 2 years, I think the AFL are quick to dismiss clubs from drafts in terms of sanctions, but the flow-on effect is huge. These are the reasons why Michael Hurley doesn't have the tattoo. Like if you put a Paddy Cripps in that team for 8 years, you're a different profile altogether. You can take some risks with your drafting. They haven't had that luxury. So I think it's a very good list, and I think what this shows to me is that if we are ever to sanction clubs again, we saw what happened to Carlton for a decade, and I think these 2 years to Essendon are still having lingering effects.
Yes, but that's actually reassuring. So if you cheat the salary cap in such a brazen manner, and then if you conduct your club in the way that happened, this hurts you for years to come. Like the punishment has to be so severe that it doesn't just hurt you for 1 year.
For 10.
What you've just illustrated is reassuring to me.
Really?
Draft bans are not used lightly. They are used in the most extreme circumstances, but there has to be an extreme punishment that lasts for years. That's reassuring.
So you put a line through the careers of all those players for 8 to 10 years.
That club earned that penalty.
No. Yeah, okay.
And if you're not prepared to do that as a system, then where's the disincentive to
I think financial sanctions would be.
But powerful rich clubs, financial sanctions don't do the trick.
Yeah, no. Well, we'll agree to disagree on this one. I just think to set a club back for 10 years is not really what we're all about. And these two powerful clubs have been on their knees for so long.
So the actual job, if you get the right coach, so they haven't played in the right way this year.
No.
And that's a bit of a curiosity because there are well-regarded coaches within that staff, but their defensive mechanisms have been as bad as the team we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, and for a long time. Yeah, for 5, 6, 7 years. So interestingly, the top 4 teams going into this final series are ranked 1, 2, 3, 4 without the footy for the last 6 weeks. There's no secret to it. If you can't defend, if you're not hard to play against, if you don't deny the opposition their ball movement or their ability to score when they go inside 50 or intercept the ball in the mid-zone of the ground, if you don't do those things, you're an also-ran. And it's just a matter of what position you finish. 18th, 16th, 13th, whatever, okay? You will never correct. You will never be competitive. And this is why Ben Rutten's not there. He's had his hands on the strategic steering wheel for 3 years and this hasn't been addressed or it hasn't been changed, altered. So he either couldn't do it or he wouldn't do it. Okay, Worsfold couldn't do it, wouldn't do it. You can go as far back as you like. So the next coach that comes in, I think, starts with a pretty good list, all sorts of improvement to the system, and then from improving the system, you get better returns from your players. So the structure brings a level of consistency to those players, and you get a better spread of contributors. So I think it's a great job to get. But I just don't know who gets it. That's the hard part.
So it's got the potential upside that Carlton has had. Voss and a crew walk in and they get an immediate improvement. They end up 9th.
Yep.
But they're on the cusp of good things.
And I think they've got a better salary cap situation than what Carlton would have right now.
Okay.
Carlton have spent big on a few players to try and correct things quickly.
Yeah. So Leon Cameron was great listening on Crunch Time on Saturday. If you didn't hear that at the time, it's there on the podcast. And he spoke at length about essentially being a prospective coach, what Essendon has to do before they worry about going and talking to a coach. And he was really clear about that. So he is in that space and he could not have been clearer around what Essendon needs to do before they even think about picking up the phone and finding the next coach.
So let's have a over and unders, okay? What date do you think we'll know the Essendon coach?
Where are we? 4 or 5 weeks of the season to go. Probably it'll either be in...
Will we know by grand final day?
We'll know either side. Maybe I might go the week after the grand final for that one rather than the week of the grand final.
It's a long time away, isn't it?
But that gives them time to actually do the work. That's 6 weeks. So they can do the external review work and then start to talk to coaches. But before they get to the pointy end, go to the coaches and say, okay, this is what our clubs looks like in independent eyes, so that you know this is our scenario. If it spooks you, let's not do it. So yeah, I wouldn't be dallying for a single moment if I'm running the external review. I'd be starting those interviews tomorrow.
I couldn't help but think, Jared, what if Clarkson had have chose Essendon? Like, we've had a bit of fun with Kane on the weekend. Okay, Kane's copped his clips on the weekend, and I look forward to Friday. But what if this was North Melbourne today? Where to discussions. Oh, you can't go down this path again. You can't go down. Oh, they're a basket case. Oh, they can't attract anyone. That's why I think that the Clarkson acquisition is so big.
Yep.
Because the decisions you have to make today, who knows where they take you? If they improve your football club in any meaningful way.
Alan Richardson, the head of footy at Melbourne, with us on crunch time.
How good.
Yes, yeah. So this was the worst bit in the round, and that was Dayne Zorko's cruel sledge to Harrison Petty. How graphic that was at 3/4 time, and where we find resolution in the aftermath.
I first says I didn't say anything, and then the next day there's a statement. It's ugly all round, you know. Alan Richardson, top of the pops, top of the class. That was just terrific what he tried to do and how that club handled and treated one of their own. They wanted to look after Harrison Petty first and foremost. And if you're a Melbourne player, you know the club's doing everything right by their own. That's a huge endorsement for Alan and for Simon and for their football club. Chris Fagan must look at that and say, are we doing the same? Are we doing the same for our playing group living under this banner and accepting this? You got to shift away from that. I mean that's unacceptable. Yeah, that sort of stuff. He's a recidivist. The players know it. So I think I was probably disappointed that Brisbane didn't make their own statement on this. And then as a second reaction to that, I don't understand why the players don't have their own code. Why aren't and I love Patrick Dangerfield, but if he's the president of the Players Association, they should be calling out one of their own and holding him to account for treating one of their own in this fashion. So Harrison Petty should be looked after as much as anyone. Why do they allow that?
Well, the answer to that is they represent both players in that instance.
Yeah, but one's broken the code. One's treating their own disrespectfully. That's not what we want. So I think going forward, they should look at some sort of not that they have to suspend their own, but there has to be some sort of sanction for players that disrespect the playing group like this. And I don't think it's always left to the AFL. And this was awkward for the AFL. It got too hot for the AFL.
Well, I think they try to avoid stepping in on sledging because sledging is it's such a murky area. Vilification's easy. Sledging is not.
We've got a respect policy, haven't we?
Well, there's all sorts of different ways that you could carve it up to step in. But I do think this is a Lions issue.
Yeah, 100% it is.
Not an AFL
He's their captain,
issue.
Jerry.
Yes.
He's the leader of their troops. And they look across and that's what's happening?
It adds to a setup for the Lions, who are the pressure index. They've come home 6-5. And they've got 2 suspensions out of what happened on Friday night. And they look like they're coming apart.
Yeah. And look, I don't know for how many weeks we can keep pointing out their defensive problems. It's like shallow hell up there. He doesn't see it the same way we do, you know? It's just, they've had little flaws over the last couple of years. Their midfield give you a chance the other way. That hasn't really changed. Lee Montagna showed some vision last night, highlighting that again. It's the same players again. Their defensive end, I'm not even going to bother talking about the names, but they just allow you a free run at the ball. Whether it's a halfback flanker or a key position player, they allow you a free run at the ball. And that doesn't win big games. If you play quality opposition, you will bleed. So what's the point of setting up a game plan that wins a lot of home and away games? Ring Chris Scott. Chris Fagan should ring Chris Scott and say, mate, we win a lot of home and away games. Why don't we win finals? And he'll say, well, you know what? I've been through this, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes you've got to set up to lose some home and away games to win big finals, to not win every game of the year. Because right now it's a false economy what they're doing. And they can argue it, and there'll be excuses, and they'll be well scripted, but they'll be short of big games in September again. They've finished outside the 4. I mean, they've got a list that should be entrenched in the 4 and looking to host home prelim finals. They're far from that. And this opportunity, what do you get, a 5-year window to win one with a great group? That's what they've got right now. It's being frittered away. So they just don't see it the same way. That's the problem, is they don't see it the same way. So how can you fix a problem if you don't identify and concede you got one?
If they lose an elimination final, that'll be inescapable, I suspect. They are the pressure index, and they'll be heavily in our thoughts when we sit for the Monday means test to set up the final series next week. Whose best is best? It is our debate. And it comes off the back of seeing Melbourne play like that on Friday night. And the one rider we were talking about on Crunch Time on Saturday was, if Brisbane is Melbourne's bunny in such a way, does that skew what happened? Because what happened was quite powerful.
So let's do it a different way, all right? Nothing's as straightforward as whose best is best. So I think the game goes into different zones. So when the game is at its brutal best, there is only one, and that's the Ds. I mean, they've got a trio of midfielders that just love contest. They love contact, and they love brutalising the opponent, and they've got a couple of ruckmen that can give them a slight advantage wherever the ball goes. So in contest, for me, Melbourne will win, will dominate. Now, dominating might only be plus 8 contested possessions for the day in a final. It's not going to be plus 50 like it was yesterday. I don't think that'll be the case. But then when you talk about ball movement, then you've got to track back to Richmond and track back to Geelong, because they have been the best in the back half of the season. Geelong probably been the best across the course of the year consistently. They've been very good. New aggressive game plan that finds ways to score. A forward 50 that hums. So if you're talking ball movement, that's where I'd be going. But if you're talking then the ability to defend, well then you're back to Collingwood, you're back to Geelong, and then maybe a little gap back to Melbourne. So if you want to put all of those together, I think you end up at Geelong, because their contested game can improve if they put that bloke with number 35 and let him free in the midfield and he's at full health. Well, then he's a one-man war. So I think you can, in my opinion, if you can put all those 3 together or 4 things together, then I think you got no other option but Geelong, have you? Where do you sit?
No, I'm thinking about it.
I just said you had no other options.
I'm thinking about it.
Well, what do you think? Well, let us in a little bit. Whose best is best, Jerry?
I suspect Melbourne's is.
Melbourne's?
Yeah. So, and it is based on what we've seen before when they sharpened up. And it looks like, so I can make the parallels. These things are better fitted in hindsight. But round 23 last year, heroic comeback, win after the siren against Geelong, and then go on to play at least 2 finals like I can't ever remember seeing before. Get out of jail against Carlton, huge emotional uplift. Next game, all-powerful performance. Are they building towards reproducing that? I think there's a very real possibility they are. So I found Friday night very reassuring from a Melbourne perspective on some of the open questions. But the kicker is that because it was against the Lions, or is that what they're going to deliver in the final series?
So this is, I'll go back to where you were last year, and you brought this to our terminology, I think, on the eve of the finals of 2021. Yeah, the oil and water discussion. When oil plays oil, it's fine. You can work out who's going to hold sway. You know, if they're just a contest-only team, head-to-head, both teams are the same, then you can work out who's going to hold sway. But when you've got one's a ball movement team versus a contest team, like the Sydney Swans versus Melbourne, and we'll get to that next week.
Yes.
But they're just opposing parties. So it's impossible to say that will beat that. So this is the beauty of the matchup. We're going to talk about the matchups that suit some teams. Now, if Melbourne can only do that to Brisbane consistently and no one else, then it's hard to hold that same thought process, isn't it?
And that's the qualifier
This is
of what
where
we saw on
your
Friday
seedings
night.
confuse me week on week. And you're here again.
Luke Beveridge in prospects, and then when the music stopped, they were in 8th. So, Kingy, they never got higher than 8th. They were in 8th place after round 11, after round 15, after round 19, and then when the music stopped, they were there at the end. They are the curiosity. The Bulldogs made the finals.
It's unreal, isn't it? and it was off the back of a blitz in the second quarter out of centre bounce. They kicked 4 goals, 2 from 7 centre bounce clearances. Like, you're lucky to score 2 goals for a game. They scored 4 goals in a quarter of football from centre bounces. And I think that's the Dogs. They're dangerous, and they're. I still think they're building. I mean, we saw young Darcy again take a couple of contested marks in the forward half this time. And you go, wow, hang on, look out. You know, ball reports they're in for lob. So this list will change dramatically, I think, at the end of the year. But the core of what they are is in the midfield. Can they really cause some threats to Fremantle? We'll talk about that next week. But you know, they're hard to get a line on the Dogs. But the fallout would have been huge if they didn't make it. So I don't think it makes any difference to whether you can win it or not. Finishing 8th, I don't think. I did this exercise, 5th to 8th, Gerard, over the last 10 years. So 40 teams have finished, obviously, 5th to 8th. 20 of them drop out first week, logically. Only one has gone on to become Premier, and that was the Dogs in 16. And only three teams in total have made the grand final. There was Dogs last year and GWS
Giants,
of 19. So 5th to 8th, what is it really?
Yeah, so I think the curiosity for the Dogs is what you've identified is if you miss the finals, having played in the grand final and led halfway through the third quarter, it is a disaster, and you can't colour that up. The second part is there's a whole lot of questions that they do need to ask themselves internally, and I'm sure they will still do that.
Yeah,
I don't think falling into 8th at the end. I think they're too smart to be distracted by that.
And I think the truth of it all, and they would never concede this, and we would never ask them to, is that the loss of intelligence from Hansen and King and Corey, these guys exiting the Dogs pretty much all at once in the same sort of time frame, it has really knocked them around a little bit. You can't lose that quality of intel. So it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge for the Dogs all year.
Could you just run preliminary final integrity over Richmond for us?
Oh, how good. The Tigers have mastered ball movement. We know. I keep saying their system is the best system in the comp because it does allow them to score with that rapid wing line, brilliant handball game, and they've got spark players forward of centre that are in some serious form. And then they add the youngster in Cumberland in there, and all of a sudden you go, wow, we've got another threat. Martin coming back, another threat. You know, he doesn't have to come back in career best form. He just has to come back and be another soldier forward of centre. So they're the number one team in the competition for any time they've got their hands on the ball the last 6 weeks of footy. So being able to turn a possession into a score anywhere on the ground, it's Richmond, number one. So that's a huge asset. Number one at moving the ball from defensive 50 to forward 50. Number one when it goes inside 50 at converting that into a score. It's a picket fence, 1-1-1-1. Yep. It's amazing what they're doing with the ball, but without the ball, you can get them. And this is unlike Richmond. Haven't seen this before under Damien Arbig. So they're rated bottom 5, bottom 6 in the competition without the footy. So it's going to rely a lot on their brilliance this campaign, but they are bloody brilliant.
They got that right. We have to dip our lid to Max King, who kicked 5 straight.
I don't want to talk about Max.
You have to. He kicked 5 straight.
Jared.
Does he still need outside help?
I got in trouble last week. We had a conversation about Max. Does he still? Well, everyone needs help, Jared. You'll need help in a minute if you keep this up.
Anyway, I just think salute to Max King. A week on. They got that wrong. Oh, I think Kane has to wear this. I think, we've got Sonja Hood, who delivered the most perfect line on crunch time. Absolutely deluxe. This goes into your backyard, into your nest.
Well, sometimes they come back, don't they? And sometimes the clips come back, and you got to wear them. You got to have a laugh. Not convinced he's won it and had a laugh, which we'll touch on later in the week. But look, each to their own. Sonja, I think, was probably the most popular person in the AFL community last Friday. So let's just enjoy that. And you know what? If that's a 2-day victory lap, I'll take it, because as we talked about before, the gap between where they would have been today as opposed to where they are is enormous. Can you imagine if Sonja hadn't had the victory lap, where they'd be right now? Oh.
We have to be mature enough also to go, losing on Saturday was the optimal result. Don't go through all that pain and then miss the number one draft pick.
Did anyone think that they were the victory had already been had?
That's right. They had their most compelling victory in years.
And what would a 3-win season done as opposed to a 2-win season?
It would have undermined a lot of what they're going to be trying to do next.
Thank you,
So
Jared.
we have to be mature enough to at least acknowledge that,
Yes,
I think.
Yes.
All right. I want you, because next week's means test is actually the finals means test.
Okay.
We've still got this godforsaken bye. See, I'm very positive this morning. Notice that. I'm not mired in I can't believe we're doing this again. So this week's seedings are going to be
2 things I can't believe today.
the bottom 10.
One is that you haven't whinged about the buy, and the second is that you bought a coffee. That's the first time for the year.
Shouted everyone who wanted it.
Oh, yeah, sure you did.
Oh, I'm told I did. So the seedings from the bottom 10
And the bottom 10.
as to future prospects. And then next week we will do our seedings leading into the finals.
So when you say future prospects, what
Actually, no, you can do it any way you like.
Thank you, Jared.
You can have the order of the 4 teams you most like out of the ones who missed. So our seedings for Red Energy Moving House, called local energy retailer Red Energy, are centred on the other 10 teams. And just your feelings about them, I guess.
Okay.
4 in order, same way, and then next week we do our finals seedings. So at 4.
So at 4, with the potential to be somewhere between 5th and 8th next year, if they get the coach right and the organisation right and defend the way most teams do, I think the Bombers can be a top 8 team, somewhere between 5 to 8. 7 wins this year. They can easily win 5 more games if they start to play the defensive side of the game.
I've got Essendon at 4 as well. There was a bit of a process of elimination here going, I don't like them. Who am I left with?
I'm seriously uncomfortable that we're in agreement.
It's actually a really bad idea for what it's worth. 3.
Look, the Saints. I think they can also finish 5 to 8 next year if they can get some trading done in the off season. Maybe move on a couple that have sort of teased and sort of with a light feather over the last few years just tickled their fancy. I think they can easily be a 5 to 8 team. I think they're better than what they've produced this year. I think they've had some bad luck at the wrong time and probably played a bit of a false brand on occasion. So get that right and they can spike quite quickly.
I've gone Gold Coast at 3 with Ben King returning. Did a lot right. Got their 10 wins, which was par for me. Now that step it up to 12 wins next year. 3?
I've gone 2 for me. Port Adelaide.
Yeah, so have I.
Yeah. Rosie and Butters becoming, is it Henry Rolls and Charles Royce? Rolls and Royce? Rolls-Royce. If those 2 go and take control, I think when you've got a pairing of an elite midfielders, you can spike quite quickly. When you've got one, then it's like we're seeing with Lockie Neal, it's a challenge to find the support crew. So I put it on Kane Farrell last night. I think if Farrell can go and become an elite player, Port can go at least 3 to 6.
And the whole purpose of this exercise is to be able to say the words, the 1 seed is Carlton. See?
Is that what you've got?
See how I did that?
Is that what you've done?
You've got to admit that's clever.
They're a top 4 team for me next year.